Hi, everyone. This is Sam Silverman, managing partner of EB5AN. Thank you for taking time to join us on today's webinar. Today, we're going to be speaking about the EB5 visa I-526E statistics that were recently made available, specifically the breakdown between rural and non-rural or urban TA filings by country. New data has come out, and we'll be analyzing it and talking about the conclusions that we've drawn with respect to new rural and urban TEA investors who are now looking to file new applications starting March 1st. If you're interested in getting a copy of the slides, we're going to make the slides available and a recording of this webinar in our blog post on this same topic. So if you're looking for the slides or want to watch a recording of this, please check back on our website in the next couple of days, and you'll find both of those on the post about this. All right, first a quick overview of what we're going to cover during today's webinar. And I think actually even before we get into this, this is probably going to be our second biggest webinar ever. We had several hundred people sign up for this. I think the only bigger webinar that we've ever done was right after the RIA went into effect in March of 2022. So this is a major topic that has a lot of investors interested given the green card timeline implications with these rural and urban TEA set-asides. So very important topic, especially for new investors considering investing after March of 2024. So first, we'll talk a little bit about EB5AN. We'll break down the data that we have available by rural and non-rural or urban by country. Then we'll talk about some of our predictions, conclusions, and a next kind of analysis 2.0 of where we think we're going in the future and what are some other helpful tools that EB5AN is going to be releasing soon. Then we'll talk about some of the advantages of rural TEA projects given this new data. And then we'll conclude and spend a few minutes talking about some of the rural and urban TEA projects that EB5AN has currently available, and what could be the best fit given your financial and immigration goals. So first, a little bit about EB5AN. As I mentioned, I'm Sam Silverman, one of the two managing partners. A little bit about my background and bios there on the left-hand side of the screen, and joined as well today with my partner, Mike Schoenfeld. And I'll let Mike jump in and share a little bit about his background and experience and kind of the genesis for our company.
Perfect. Thanks, Sam. And just to reiterate, this is probably one of the most important webinars that we'll have post RIA. And our background, so both Sam and I worked at the Boston Consulting Group many years ago, and our team is made up of many people from more of the finance and institutional side. And I think that's important because what we're working with now is recently available data that AIA was able to get out of USCIS. And to make any conclusions from that, it's always going to be an incomplete picture, but you are able to make reasonable assumptions on what the levers are. And that's what our background is in management consulting at BCG and then finance after. So I just think it's important as we go through this. These are the types of analyses that we like to do. And part of the reason why we came into the EB5 industry was because we were both more from the institutional side of the world, saw an industry that could use some professionalism. And over the past 10 years, we've worked with more than 2,000 EB5 investors across our regional centers, and believe that we provided best-in-class transparency and information on the industry.
Exactly. Yeah, this is very, very similar to a lot of the analysis, conclusion, summarization that we would work on at BCG. Very, very similar. And so, we're very comfortable in this type of analysis and putting together this in a very easy to understand format, which we'll be going through today. So one of the things that I think we've really emphasized over the last 10 years, and that kind of sets us apart from many of the other participants in the EB5 space, is that we're focused on transparency. And so we want to make sure that investors have all the information available that could be relevant when selecting a project. So, financial statements, the full 956F filing package, all of that information, the latest sales data, whatever that information is, if we have it, we're going to make it available. And that's quite different from a lot of the other companies in the space for a variety of reasons. But we think it's really critical that investors have the opportunity to connect one-on-one with Mike or I and have their questions addressed directly in writing, and also get access to all of this information. And then with that information, they can draw their own conclusions and make decisions based on their own personal preferences. So along those lines, we're very available to chat with clients. We know April, with the upcoming fee increase on April 1, a lot of people are rushing to get their application submitted in the next few weeks. Mike and I are available. We're working 7 days a week. You can reach us directly by booking a phone call, sending a message, email, and we'll be able to chat with you and get you connected with a few immigration attorneys who may have capacity to take on additional clients who are trying to meet the upcoming April 1st deadline. And well, I won't go through this in detail, but these are some examples of what this investment transparency commitment, what it actually translates to in terms of making an EB-5 investment today. And again, we'll make these slides available, but the main thing is that you should never invest unless you're fully comfortable with the financial position of the companies involved, and that you've had a chance to ask every possible question that you have and get clear and concise answers to those questions. One of the other things that we focused on is identifying red flags. There are a lot of potential issues that projects may have that can be difficult for investors who aren't reviewing projects on a regular basis to really dig into. A lot of these documents are complex. They're hundreds of pages. For someone like me or Mike, who's reviewed hundreds of these, within 1 hour, we can read something and quickly tell you where the problems are. That's very difficult for someone who's reading one of these packages of documents for the first time. So don't panic. Just talk to us. Talk to someone who, knows what they're doing and can help guide you through. And if you have questions, you should absolutely ask them and get the answers. That way there's no misunderstandings and you know exactly what you're signing up for. This is a complicated investment. There's both an immigration component and a financial component, and you've got to understand, what facts and what assumptions are going into both of those decisions. This is a map showing where many of our prior investors have come from over the years. We've worked with investors from more than 60 countries, thousands of investors over the years. All right, now we'll shift kind of over to the first part of the meat of the presentation today. And before we do that, first, a special thank you to AIIA, American Immigrant Investor Alliance, out of DC, a nonprofit that's helped to obtain this new data, and also to the Galati law firm, the law firm that's worked with AIIA to file the lawsuits that have been able to force USCIS to basically release this data in a timely manner, so that we can actually draw conclusions from it and help future investors. This hasn't happened before. Many years ago, there was a similar backlog with China, and that was completely unsuspecting, came without any notice. Now that we have this data in advance, it's very clear that the same exact thing that happened in China in 2015 is happening now. The only difference is now we have the data of recent filings to be able to show, in advance that the same thing is going to happen, unlike last time. So we really appreciate the efforts of both of these organizations in helping to, add additional transparency to the industry and get this information available for everyone to review, analyze, and then draw their own conclusions. And to start, I'll let Mike kind of summarize how we're approaching this, and then we'll dive into some of the details and some of the numbers.
Perfect. Thanks, Sam. So overall, when looking at this data, it's really important to know that there's some knowns and some unknowns. So what we've done is we have taken all of the known information, which is a lot more than we've ever had before, the filings in detail by country, by category, analyzed the trends, and we've made common sense assumptions based on historical data from there to get to these conclusions. And I will say that everything that we've done, we believe is conservative in the sense of we believe that it likely actually undercounts the amount of real visa demand for both the urban and rural TEA categories, and we'll explain why, but we are using the best information available to get to this answer. So we tried to put together one key slide, which you can really walk step by step to understand the data that's available and how we're getting to the conclusion. So let's flip to that, because I think that what you'll see is every different industry participant may have a spin that they are trying to put on this data. We are one of the few companies, we have both rural and urban TEA deals. We are also data driven and would prefer for investors to have the data available, make their own assumptions based on historical facts, and come to their own conclusions. There is no perfect answer right now. There's lots of outside factors that could change, but we do have 85 to 90% of the information needed to make a very real target prediction, and a lot of the other things out there could be noise to deflect from the reality. So to jump into this and really just walk through this slide one by one. So we have actual filings from USCIS data through October of 23. So at the end of October of 23, there were 3,315 applications that have been filed for the 526Es. Of that, a 2-to-1 ratio of urban TEAs to rural TEAs. So 21-22 through the end of October for high unemployment urban TEAs, and a little over 1,000 for rural. And then when you look at country breakdowns, a little over 50% China, which is not unexpected, 17% India. And one of the more unexpected things was that 31% is the rest of the world, where this is demand that's much higher than we've seen before for the rest of the world. And later in the presentation, Ahmed, who's joining us, will talk a little bit more about that. But for now, we'll stay on kind of the core numbers. So just taking what's been filed through October of 23, we needed to project to the end of February of this year. So what we did is we took a run rate of the last 3 months of data that we had before the end of October, so August, September, October, and just assumed that it's the exact same amount for the next 4 months, for the same time period, prorated. So although there is a very strong increasing trend in the number of applications, and we're seeing that internally, I think all immigration attorneys will also tell you that, and looking at the trends of USCIS every quarter has been significantly more than the last quarter lately, and there's an increased volume of applications. We're assuming that demand kind of stayed flat from the end of October through the end of February, which we know is an underestimate. So from there, we can estimate that at least 4,644 investors have filed their 526Es, in keeping the most recent blend of urban to rural, where it's shifting a little bit from 2-to-1 on urban to less than that. We can come up with an estimate of 2,849 urban TEA applications to 1,622. Now, I think once the next set of data comes out, we're going to see it's more like over 3,000 urban TEA and probably closer to 2,000 rural, but we'll see when the data comes out, because we can't make those predictions until we have real data. So from there, when we look at the urban TEA category, and this is probably the most important part, if there have been 2,849 applications, the average number of visas attached to each application is the critical assumption here, because that's what moves the needle in terms of how long the backlog is going to be. Historically, the number for India and China is about 2.8 to 2.9 visas per applicant. We're going to go down to 2.5 because this also does not take into account the denial rate, which some people will argue could be high, could be low. So we're going to use a moderate 2.5 times multiplier. Some people would use 3. We're going to use 2.5. But what that translates to is that the actual demand right now for urban TEA, if everybody that applied was approved today, there would be over 7,000 visas needed. Now, that doesn't really work with supply and demand when there's only 1,000 of these set-aside visas available per year. So with one rollover year, 2,000 visas. Now we are in a little bit of a surplus now because the last couple of years have had extra over the 10,000 visas per year. But steady state, and this is getting a little bit more advanced, there's 10,000 EB5 visas available. 10% of those are set aside for the urban TEAs, the high unemployment urban TEAs. So 1,000 visas a year, and 20% are set aside for rural deals. And when you look at rural, even projecting out the future data, we come up with about 4,056 visas would be needed for those investors. And there's currently that many rural visas available. So as we're looking at it now, we can confidently say that based on this projection, rural is current. Now, new data may come out that shows more rural demand where there could be a slight backlog there as well, although we think it's unlikely that it's already there. But urban, we can very clearly see that there's many more years of demand for those visas than what are available. So our best estimate now is approximately 5+ year wait for an urban TEA for a new investor filing today from India or China. That's our best guess at the conclusion. Now, of course, things can change, and there's a lot of other factors that could make the picture much worse than this. But if you're an investor looking just using common sense assumptions, you very quickly see urban TEAs are not current anymore. On the visa bulletin, they are, because we need enough approvals for it to show a backlog, but there's very clearly more demand for that category than rural. So with that, there's a pretty simple assumption that depending on your personal situation and priorities, you need to take that into account. Now, for investors not from China, India, and several other high demand countries such as Taiwan, Vietnam, South Korea, and even others, urban could still be a great fit. If you're in the US and can adjust status and don't mind waiting 5+ years for your green card because you can get other benefits, sure, it could be a good fit. But what we would imagine is that for a majority of Chinese and Indian investors in other high demand countries, the rural is likely a better fit. And with that, I'll pause for a second and let Sam and Ahmed jump in on the summary level conclusions before we go through some of the more granular data, which helped us to get to this point.
Yep, and I think before we let Ahmed Khan, a vice president with our team and also a very experienced EB5 attorney who's worked at some of the top law firms, comment, one thing I just want to emphasize that Mike touched on is that this analysis is with respect to new investors who are filing today, right? Because the data previously, available is only through October. We've projected forward through February because even though that data isn't actually released by USCIS, obviously hundreds and hundreds of investors, thousands in fact, have filed since October of 2023. So you have to take into account all of those additional filings that are going to be ahead of anyone who's filing a new I-526E petition today, right? So that's the difference between 3315 and 4644. That's kind of our flat, average forward estimate for November, December, January, and February. We think it's very conservative because we've seen the volume of applications and it's gone up significantly. It hasn't remained flat like it was in the prior months, but projecting very conservatively and then multiplying by 2.5 gets to these numbers. So that's kind of mechanically why it really is important to take into account that if you're a new person coming in today, you're going to be behind all of those people who've filed before today. And with that, I'll let Ahmed jump in and share his thoughts on this data as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Thanks, Mike. I think this is a really, really great starting point for any investor who's looking to make a final decision, over the next few days or before April 1st and filing their EB5 application. So this data, like as Mike explained, there's a lot of different ways that, these numbers can be shifted. Obviously, one of the big ones is the multiplier of 2.5 that we've used. Now, this is in line with historical numbers, right? We've typically seen a multiplier from both India and China, somewhere between 2.5 and 2.9, depending on the year, depending on the month, et cetera, et cetera. So this number is a little bit conservative and it certainly could be higher. But on the same side, on visas available, we've not included some of the surplus that we get every year For example, Urban TEA has a little over 2,800 visas available in this year. So there's a lot of other factors here that we're not going to discuss on this webinar. There's definitely going to be more to come. This was just kind of like, hey, if you're looking to invest in the next 30 days and you're choosing your project, you need to know what you're getting yourself into in terms of wait times, right? And as much as we want to be optimistic and, kind of hope that there will be some kind of reform or some kind of way that USCIS can, reuse or use numbers that were previously lost, or, figure out a way to move numbers that are not available in the set aside into the set aside, maybe from the unreserved category. There's been a lot of conversations of that already over the last few days, but the reality is you kind of have to look at the data, the numbers, and make a assumption on kind of what you think you're going to be in the line of people who are looking for a green card, and then go from there, right? When the RA was passed, both of these set asides had a fixed number of visas allotted to them for a reason, right? The government is kind of creating this category, or this subcategory, as we can call it, for a reason. So yeah, every investor should be looking at these numbers with a grain of salt, but at the same time, there's some things that we really can't ignore here. So yeah, just looking at kind of the urban high unemployment numbers, first of all, we're kind of surprised, right? We weren't expecting for people to continue filing in this category, just due to the fact that rural has doubled the amount of space every year, right? So we expected more people, especially from countries that have historically hit backlogs in the EB5 categories, such as India and China, to file more in the rural category. It has more room. There had previously been less filings, right? That we also got that data from the previous AIIA FOIA request from USCIS. And yet what we saw instead was an increase, almost double the number of filings in high unemployment versus rural. So what's happened is kind of a twofold effect of, you've got double the number of filings, right, in urban high unemployment, and yet you've got half the number of visas available. So what that's done is create a little bit of a shortage and a backlog that could be implemented anytime this year, right? We don't know exactly when it's going to hit, because one of the other things that a lot of folks don't understand is these numbers go in and USCIS counts the number of applications that are filed. They don't honestly know, right, how many people are being included in each application. And the visa bulletin doesn't change until the Department of State starts issuing green cards, whether it's at the consulate or here in the United States through adjustment of status. And so what that does is it creates what people like to call a hidden backlog, right? This is something that I think AIA has talked about in their previous webinars, is you've got a hidden backlog where even though the visa bulletin is showing as current, you're going to have a situation where the urban high unemployment, you're already sitting in the backlog, you just don't know it yet if you're from China or India or one of the other high filing countries. Another thing that I'd like to point out is the actual filings from the rest of the world, right? We don't have a full breakdown just yet of exactly which countries comprise this rest of world data, but we see for sure that China and India continue to dominate the market, as they always have, but we've seen a sudden surge from other countries. And unfortunately, the numbers are so low to work with, right? Urban high unemployment only gets 1,000 visas per year. The numbers are so low that a few hundred applications coming from non-India, non-China can take up a significant portion of the 1,000 visas that are available every year. And that's where this 5,000 visa shortage becomes even more troubling, I guess, for Chinese and Indian investors, because every visa that's given to a rest of world person takes away from the overall number available to people within the category, right? So if you're from one of the countries that's got a high number of filers, for example, China, you could be sitting in an even longer line than the 5-year backlog we're talking about here, because of how many visas still must be allotted to countries that don't have a high filing number. So all this to say, this is not like doomsday type prediction stuff. This is, hey, look, there's a lot of people, there's a set number of visas available in each of these categories. A lot of people have already taken advantage of that. And we knew that going into the RIA. We knew there was a window of opportunity. And we said that, very early on after the passing of the RIA. That window of opportunity for urban high unemployment seems to have passed. You're definitely going to be sitting in some kind of wait period, even after your approval to get your green card, if you're from one of the traditional filing countries. Now, could it be a 3-year wait, maybe a 4-year wait? Possibly, right? There's a lot of different factors at stake here, and we just covered a few of them, briefly. We'll talk about them more maybe in a different webinar, but yeah, there's still a remote possibility that it's not going to be 5 years. But there's also a possibility in a real way that we can kind of extrapolate from this data that it's even longer than a 5 year wait, right? So I think that the best way that an investor can look at this data is say, okay, I'm sitting behind a lot of people who have already filed their case, right? There's over 2,000 people that we know of for sure, and probably even more than that have filed ahead of me. And historically, most of those applications include at least 2 family members, if not closer to 3, right? That's what we know for sure. And no matter what else happens between October and February, or even after during this month before April 1st, we just know that those numbers exist and nothing is going to take away from them. So if I'm an Indian or Chinese investor, I'm taking that into account into my decision. And as Mike said, that may not be the end of the world, right? Maybe you find a project that you feel very comfortable with in the high unemployment area, and we definitely have both available in our portfolio. That's fine, but you have to know that you're possibly kind of going to be waiting longer for your green card to actually be received in your hand while you're going through this EB-5 process.
Yep, exactly. All right, so now let's double click on some of the data. So this is through October, and we can see kind of the individual country by country breakdown. And so, just by eyeballing this, right, like, we can see that of the rural applications, China, was definitely closer to 50-50 in terms of rural, whereas a lot of the other countries were, India and rest of world. Rest of the world not as interested in rural. India a little more so. China definitely the most interested, right? So again, looking at the number of visas available in the urban category per country, it's definitely more of a issue. It's the major issue is for China because all those people, already there. And then when you look at the other countries, yes, not as many, right? So
yeah, and just to jump in here, sorry, Sam, but the number of high unemployment filings for both India and the rest of the world, this 375 and the 771 number, these are the numbers that everyone should be a little bit, surprised by, right? So just again, kind of back to my point that we've all been hearing for several months now, like, oh no, rural's going to catch up. Rural filings are definitely going to outpace high unemployment. Like we've been hearing this since the summer, really, and yet here we are, several months later, and there's a significant difference in especially for India, but look at rest of world. I mean, we're talking about almost a 7-to-1 ratio of filings into high unemployment. And so, yeah, China's got, a lot of folks that are going to be in line, but look at how many visas are going to be taken away from both India and China from the rest of the world. There's 770 plus applications already pending. And yeah, that's a lot of green cards that are going to be allotted to not the 2 big filers for pretty much the conceivable future.
Yep, and again, this is only through October, right? This is the real data. Like this data is undisputable. Like this is coming directly from USCIS. Like these are facts. Then when we look at, okay, if we just take the average from August, September, October, and we project that forward, now this is what we think at a minimum it looks like through February, right? And so now we're almost at 1,000 rest of world, 500 plus in India, and almost 1,400 in China.
Yep. Mike, do you have any thoughts about? Let's actually jump to this slide. Yeah, I think
exactly. This is the slide that I wanted to focus on, because as we're talking about just projecting forward the last 3 months, if you look at how demand is growing, it's growing quickly. We're seeing the same thing on our side as what the lagging USCIS is showing, to where we don't think that it's realistic. It just went forward at the same rate as the last 3 months over the next 4 months. We think it is a significant step change higher in terms of overall demand. So the takeaway to us is urban TEAs have definitely been much more popular, and they've continued to be more popular. it's a little too late for the urban TEA set-asides to do what everybody thought they were going to do. That time has passed. Now, rural, of course, is not immune to that, but luckily there's twice as many set-aside visas a year, and it has not been utilized at the same rate so far. So there's a lot more runway before we're going to have the same issue in rural. But the two things that kind of come to mind right here is one, until now it hasn't been this clear, but we're playing with a much smaller amount of visas than we were historically. So up until the RIA, there were 10,000 visas a year. Everybody ate first, and all the rest went to the Chinese investors in the backlog. And that's how it was working. If there were 3,000 people from everywhere else, 7,000 visas went to China. There was one category at 10,000 visas. Now what we have is 10% of the visas for the urban high unemployment TEA, so only 1,000, 2,000 for rural, a few for the infrastructure, but then pretty much all of the rest of that 7,000 visas, they go to the people already in line in China because everybody's filing in one of these reserved categories. So essentially what it's done is it's taken what used to be seen as this pool of 10,000 visas where every country was guaranteed their 7% to now each subcategory is only guaranteed their 7%. So, and this didn't really hit me until looking at this data. If you had, let's say, 40 families from Brazil apply in a year in high unemployment, and they each had 3 people on the application, that's 120 visas required. They're only allocated 7% of the 1,000 are guaranteed for them. So even that could cause a very short backlog for one of those investors. And I think that's what Ahmed was getting to, is the rest of the world is where, after more of our advanced analysis, that's where we're going to double click and really try and figure out what that looks like, what countries are at risk, and how that might play out over time and how that impacts China and India. But then just again, this chart on the slide really speaks for itself. You can make whatever assumptions you'd like, but I can tell you from experience, demand is not going down. It continues to go up. And with this fee increase, it's going to go up even more. So hopefully we get the next round of data very soon and we can plug it in and see how are our projections compared to reality. But just looking at all of this, it's hard to come to any other conclusion than what we have outside of external factors of immigration reform, removing derivatives, or something major that just isn't in the cards today to fix it. But all of the data, trends, analysis, everything we have points to the conclusion of likely a 5-year backlog. Like, we don't want to be doomsday people saying it could be 7 to 10 years, but we have a very real case in the Excel model, very easy with common sense assumptions that could get to there today for Chinese and Indian applicants. So we're not trying to say the world is ending. We just want the facts to be out there and what's realistic and practical, so everybody's working with the right information when making decisions.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think with looking at this graph, it's like so clear that demand has risen. And there's a lot of factors even to this, right? If you're new to EB5, you may not understand the landscape of how, a lot of these filings occur, right? Someone doesn't just decide to do EB5 and then a month later their money has reached escrow and they filed in the project, right? Often it takes several months for demand to show up in these filing numbers from the month prior when people were actually looking into the project, right? But clearly from this graph, it's just it's night and day. Like, it's clear that it's increasing, right? Demand is increasing. We're probably going to see a very outsized number of filings in both Q4 in 2023 and Q1 of 2024, the current few months. One, because we've got the April 1st deadline coming up, and just from our own internal numbers and just speaking with attorneys that we work with, there's been a lot of filings over the last 6 months, right? What does this really mean? And I think this is speaking to Mike's point a lot. Like, urban high unemployment could be even worse than we're currently kind of looking at, right? Rural is probably going to be worse than we're expecting. Like, in two slides ago, we expected to be right around the same number of supply and demand for rural green cards, but there's a likelihood that we've actually outpaced the supply. The good thing with rural is you get a fresh 2,000 at the end of each fiscal year, right? And that 2,000 will likely cover up any amount of filings over the next couple of months because it just hasn't skyrocketed to that high of a number yet, right? It's coming, but it hasn't happened yet. And then another thing that I think a lot of folks don't realize is just the differences in processing of these applications, right? And now that we've got almost 2 years under our belt of the RIA, we have real numbers to work with in terms of approval rates. And rural applications have been receiving approvals at a much more significant, faster rate than urban high unemployment. That's just If you look around the industry, not just at our projects, but if you look at other rural projects in the industry, you're seeing 956F approvals, you're seeing 526E approvals, and you're seeing them much more often and commonly than you are seeing high unemployment project approvals and 526E approvals. And that means that, there's another game within the game of basically rural getting approved faster, those green cards going to less waste because those people are approved in the year that those green cards are available. Whereas urban high unemployment, like I mentioned, that there's 2,800 or so visas available this year. A lot of those may go to waste because USCIS won't approve them fast enough and then ultimately issue the green card. So there's so much going on here. But yeah, I think it's very clear to see that the window of opportunity that the RIA provided is we're starting to see where it might close, not just for urban high unemployment, but also for rural. So, to paraphrase it, no better time than the now.
Yep, and I think what Ahmed mentioned there in terms of approvals actually happening, I'm sure a lot of people think, oh, EB5AN, we're focused on rural. Yes, because of these trends. But we do have urban projects as well. And of all of the investors who've filed I-526Es with EB5AN so far in the last 2 years, we've gotten many I-526Es approved for rural projects. We don't have a single I-526E approval for an urban project. And we had over 100 or almost 100 of urban I-526Es in 2022 and 23, not a single one approved yet. So we're sure that other people in the industry are going to try and position this as, urban's still getting approved quickly, maybe overall, but we have a pretty big sample size and we haven't seen a single approval. So
and we have two, to be clear, we have two approved exemplar 956Fs for urban projects with investors in those projects. And we're hoping very soon we get approvals for those 526Es, but we also have several 956F approvals on our rural deals, which were all filed much later than our urban deals. And we have approvals there on the individual investor 526Es. At the start of the RIA, like many other regional centers, we already had urban TEA deals ready. So our first several dozen investors all went into typical urban TEA projects, which is great, but we're still waiting on their approvals versus our investors that went into rural deals. And you'll get this confirmation from others in the industry and attorneys. Those petitions are being approved much faster. So the visa waste issue, I think it is a big issue. Now, it's probably only 1 year worth of visa set aside issue. So maybe 1,000, a little more for urban TEAs, 2,000 for rural. It's a big number, but when you look at the overall volume of applications, that's not what's going to move the needle. That shifts the wait list by about a year based on that. But if you're looking at the difference between 5, 6, 7 years of wait, that year isn't really what's moving the needle.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think just to explain it even a little bit more for those who might be confused as to what we're talking about when we say visa waste, let's just say this year that there's an extra, and this is pretty close to the real number, there's an extra 1,800 visas available in this year for high unemployment, right? Let's say that only 70 of those, let's say 100 of those are used. The other 1,700 go back to the unreserved category. They go back to folks that had filed pre-RIA, okay? What that does is now, let's say there's, 5,000, 6,000 people waiting in line for a high unemployment green card. They all roll over to the next year, right? They're still waiting for a green card. That number doesn't decrease, but those 1,700 visas are gone from this category and only 1,000 go over to next year, right? Only the 1,000 that we had for this year move on to next year. So you see how that visa waste issue, because of timelines in terms of approvals, can add up to being a really big problem because every year the number of investors continues to grow, right? As more and more people continue to file, but the number of visas available actually starts to decrease because we've kind of wasted some visas that were previously available that are no longer going to be available in future years in this category.
And we're calling it visa waste. We're a little more sensitive than that. It is visa usage for those that have already been waiting for 8 to 10 years that are at the back of the line from China. So this category, it gets wasted, and then it goes back to those investors that were caught in a very similar backlog to this from, I don't even know what the visa bulletin is for China right now, sometime in 2015, I believe maybe it's 2016, but it's going back to those investors that have all been waiting since then, rather than to new urban TEA investors. So the visas didn't just disappear. It's slowly clearing out that backlog that happened in a very similar situation to this almost a decade ago.
Exactly. Yeah. I think
Correct.
the summary there is that the visas just become not available for new investors who are coming in now under the urban category, and they just shift to become available for investors who joined prior to March of 2022. So they're wasted in the sense they're not available for new people filing now, which is a key piece of data that somebody new filing today should take into account when they're looking at how long it's going to take, you as a new person filing in March of 2024, how long it'll take for you to actually get a green card in your hand. All right, this is some more additional backup analysis, kind of sets forth a lot of the numbers, breaks down the calculations of some of the prior slides. We won't spend a lot of time on this, but we've included it just so you can see exactly how the math works at each stage of the equation. And now we'll
hold on.
Go ahead.
Let's shift back to that just for 1 second, because I think if any of you want to do your own analysis, here's the numbers to use. You can build your own little Excel table and you can see our exact assumptions and move them. If you don't think it's 2.5 visas and you think it's 2 visas, because there's a lot of F1 students applying now, you can move it to 2. If you think it's going to be closer to 3 visas per person, you can make that same change. So we have the data here that you can manipulate yourself if you put it in Excel and do some of your own calculations. And we'll have more on that later. And just as a point of clarification, so the visa bulletin is December of 2015 for China. So as we were referring, that's where those unused visas go that aren't going to roll over. They'll go to those that are waiting from that time period.
Perfect. All right. So Mike, do you want to start kind of walking us through some predictions and conclusions that we have?
Absolutely. So, and this is where we're using the data, but stepping a little bit outside of exactly what we can tell you for sure. We put the numbers on the screen, but what we believe is true, and we will be tracking this over time of what our predictions are versus reality, is that there's likely a 5+ year backlog already for China and India nationals that invest today forward in an urban TEA project. But concurrent filing is still available. So if you're in the US, you can get a lot of the benefits. You might just be waiting longer. And we have a deal, our Boynton project that we'll talk about, where some investors may prefer that for the deal itself, and they're fine to wait a while for the green card, and that's completely fine. But based on our estimates, this is what we expect, is that there's at least a 5-year backlog. Next is about rural. So as of today in our projections, rural is still current. Now, it is possible that more people have filed in the last 4 months than what we predicted, and that's actually what we expect, and maybe more have gone to rural. So it could be close to rural getting a short backlog as well. We can't know that for sure, and we'll find out very soon. But what it does mean is that no matter what, there's at least a pretty significant window here where you can go into a rural deal and know that it is current to concurrently file, and likely no backlog. But if there is a backlog, it will still at least be a very short backlog, just because of the amount of visas in that category being double, and the usage hasn't been that high yet. And lastly, there are other high demand countries where urban TEAs might not be the right fit. That's more of an individual decision as more data comes out. But we know that China and India, the urban category, is not really viable. And again, as we mentioned earlier, we have great urban deals, we have great rural deals, just different fits for different types of investors, depending on country of birth and current residence.
Ahmed, any thoughts on this before we go to a kind of timeline slide showing what an urban TEA investor would be looking at?
No, I think Mike makes some really good points, and I agree with most of these predictions. I think if you're not from India or China, you've still got. I'm sure there's more data coming out, in the next few days. Hopefully, AIIA is able to get their hands on even more kind of distinctive data that helps us understand exactly how the breakup has been between the different countries that are filing within both categories. But yeah, from what we know already and how many folks have already filed, and just the crazy uptick that we've already seen over the first 3 months of this year, or the first 2 months of this year. I think if you're an Indian or Chinese, you have to be prepared for a 5-year wait, right? For a green card or for a visa. This is especially, I think, painful if you're overseas, right? If you're coming from overseas, that's the date that you're able to even start traveling to the US with a green card, right? So if you're in the United States, I think there's a different calculus of what is it worth it to you. You know, if you find a project that you really like the terms for and you're willing to wait those extra few years for a green card, it's still probably going to be better than an EB2 or EB3 wait if you're Indian. So I can understand why that trade-off might be okay. But yeah, I think you're looking at least a 5-year backlog. You should be prepared for that. And then ultimately, if once you stomach that, you can make the other decisions based on other parameters that you're looking at.
All right, Ahmed, do you want to walk us through what that would look like for an investor who's in the US already and could do concurrent filing?
Yep, exactly. So this is a great visualization of what your wait time might be to get your conditional green card based on the current timelines, right? And this is for the high unemployment category, again, based on some of the previous slides we've shown. If you're filing in a rural project, you likely won't have to worry about a big part of this wait, and we'll talk about that here. So yeah, so we're using our urban TEA project, Boynton, as kind of a baseline here. But think of it this way: you file your application right at the very beginning of this chart, and once you file the application, you will be approved at some point. Now that could happen in as little as 18 months. It's possible, or it could take 2.5 years, maybe even 3 years, and it starts taking longer as the backlog increases. But for our purposes, let's just say it takes about 2 years, 2 years for your application to be approved. That's where you get stuck, right? If you're in the United States, you've got an EAD and travel permit that you would have gotten a few months after your filing, you'll have the approval in hand for your 526E. It could take a little bit longer to even get that. You'll still be able to work, you'll still be able to travel, you'll still enjoy all the benefits that come with having an adjustment of status pending, which would include living, working, traveling in and out of the US, etc. But you're not going to get that green card in your hand. For our urban high employment project, the longest term is basically a 4-year return of capital. So once your money goes into the project, that starts a 4-year term, you could be repaid earlier than the 5-year wait that you might have for your temporary green card, right? So you can kind of see this visualized here where you put your money in, you've met the immigration requirements of the 2-year risk period, right? Your money was with the developer for at least 2 years. You've met the job creation requirement. The jobs were created, the project was completed. And let's say the project decided to exit, they sold, and now they've got the money back. We could repay you, and you may still be on your EAD and travel permit still at that time. Let's say you had filed with an H-1B and just switched over to EAD. Yeah, you're still on your EAD, you still haven't gotten a green card, and then a year later, the green card finally arrives. So two pretty big takeaways from here, right? This just kind of illustrates like how long it may be for you to get your conditional green card, but also it gives you a nice runway of, okay, you do get the immediate benefit for, at least for now. We don't know when the visa bulletin may change. It may be in 1 month, maybe in 2 months, maybe in 3 months, but until that visa bulletin changes, you can still get your EAD, you can still get your advanced parole, you can still work and travel and live in the US all the time that you're waiting for your temporary green card to finally arrive. So yeah, I think that there's definitely some calculus to be done here by investors who are in the United States, because that immediate benefit is a huge deal, right? It gives you the freedom to, let's say, leave your H-1B employer, right? Start your own business, maybe do both at the same time. Like, you pretty much have the freedom to do what it is that you're trying to do with a green card very early on in this process. The only downside is, yeah, you're going to be waiting significantly long period of time to get your conditional green card in your hand. But in the meantime, you would still receive a repayment of your capital. So definitely some pros and cons there to think about.
And this is very different than what it used to be. Before the RIA, investors had to wait for a while to get their 829 approval before return to capital, and then at least to complete the 2 years of conditional residency. There has been a policy adjustment. Now, that's something for another webinar to discuss. What it does is it makes it possible currently for investors to be repaid prior to having that conditional green card for 2 years. So even if, let's say, this ended up being a 7-year wait or an 8-year wait, your investment process would be done. You would just be stuck in that backlog for a little bit longer. So again, it does change the calculus. Now, every investor is different. Some people care most about having that green card in hand as quickly as possible, but it really just depends on investors' preferences for deal and priorities.
Yep, exactly. And yeah, thanks, Mike, for kind of clarifying that. So there's definitely a lot of advanced stuff in this webinar. If you have questions about some of the things we talked about, like for example, Mike just mentioned the different rules concerning sustainment period, definitely look back to some of our previous blogs and webinars. We've talked about a lot of these things at length, and educate yourself on what all these different, different rules and different ways that these rules apply to you can kind of make make a difference in your decision.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, just to run through a couple of our thoughts on this, of just one of the things that's most frustrating is data continues to lag reality. AIA did a great job of getting this data, but we're still lagging many months behind. And we know that the next data is going to show an even worse picture. I wish we had real-time data. All that we can do is use the data that's available, make the best projections that we can, and use common sense and observations to come to the conclusions that we're coming to. And with that, we know that this April 1st fee increase is driving demand. If an investor is considering EB5, why would you not file before an $8,000 fee increase if you could? So there are going to be a lot more petitions filed, and we're already seeing that before April 1st, which again, the data is going to lag. So whatever we think is the truth now will continue to change when there's that next release of data in the future. And lastly, do your own work. Don't just trust what somebody tells you on face value. Not us, not anybody. So the numbers are available now. The data is there. You can do a little bit of research, ask questions on assumptions, and just trust the data that's there to make your decisions. Since the beginning, there has been fear mongering that this rural is going to push everybody into that category, and that category is going to backlog. So it's smart to file in the urban TEA because that won't backlog first. Never made sense to me, the logic there. The data's been against it, and that story's been continued to be pitched. Again, it's not saying that urban or rural is better. Every investor is different, but use the real data on hand, make an informed decision, and just use common sense when looking at these numbers. It's a very complicated set of facts that goes into things, but the things that drive 80 to 90% of the analysis are basic. How many people have filed? How many applications or visas are there per application in each category by country? Hard stop. All the rest of it is nuances around the edges, which does matter, but it doesn't change the conclusion of where we're getting to.
Exactly. Yep. Data is out there, and yeah, just look at the real data. Conclusion is incontrovertible.
And yeah, these are the big unknowns. So, and these are critical unknowns that unfortunately we just don't have the answers to. So the first is, when will this show up in the visa bulletin? So when does the backlog officially hit, which stops anybody from being able to concurrently file? And then we'll start seeing how big of an impact this has. So that's one of the things we just don't know, and we can't predict that. It all depends on how quickly they approve applications. So that's an unknown. We can't tell you if it's 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years from now before the backlog becomes official. Next is, how long will the rural TEA category remain current? We can't tell you. Once there's more data, we'll have a better idea of analysis. And again, the framework there is the exact same. You can flex it up and down, and we can at least get a good sense of where we stand. We know for now there's a lot less demand in rural, like approximately 2 to 1 in urban, and there's twice as many visas in rural. So it's a 4 to 1 kind of disadvantage for urban versus rural when you take those two basic factors into account. We are expecting that to change in the future and rural to gain in popularity, but it's going to take a long time to cross back over on a 4 to 1 kind of advantage of rural with getting your ticket to getting the green card quickly. And then the last thing is, what does the long-term demand look like, especially in the urban TEA category, really from the rest of the world? Because as we mentioned, and this is more of an advanced topic, with 1,000 visas in every country getting their allocation to 70, there is a real chance that there's 10 to 11 other countries outside of China and India that have more than 30 to 35 applications a year, where all of a sudden you're eating up all of the rest of those urban high unemployment visas. So they're all gone. You're left with 70 for China, 70 for India, 35 families each. And then all the rest of the visas are taken by the rest of the world, which we assume will continue to grow, and it's been growing strongly. And then anybody in China and India in the urban is in the back of the old backlog as well, just waiting for that to really clear out. So there are doomsday scenarios we can run with pretty reasonable assumptions that have a horrible picture. Now, we're not going to get into that here. Too many unknowns for that, but that's just a lot of the unknowns in the long-term tail. There is still a lot of things that could push that waiting list on the far edge out even further.
Great.
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Mike. All right. So let me kind of walk you through what's coming next from EV5AN. So this data just came out. We've only had it a few days. There's a lot more analysis to do. There's a lot more things to consider. So these are the three kind of major items that we have in the pipeline that will kind of sweep into our umbrella of urban rural analysis 2.0 that we have coming, over the next couple of weeks. So first, a dynamic Excel model with key assumption adjustability. So as Mike talked about earlier, there are some variables that we don't know, right? Number of visas per family and number of applications that went in over the last 4 months. Those are numbers that we've estimated based on common sense and historical averages, right? Maybe they're conservative, maybe they're not. We think they're conservative, but other investors, other regional centers may think they're too high, too low, whatever. Everyone has their own opinion, no problem. So what we're working on is putting together a dynamic Excel model where investors will be able to go in and make their own assumptions. So we'll include all the basic math, the framework, how do these things, tie out and result in there being a backlog and for how long. And we'll include our assumptions and then we'll make them adjustable. So the model will be dynamic. Investors, users of this free file that we'll make available will be able to go in and say, okay, well, I don't think it's going to be 2.5 visas per family. I think it's only going to be 2 or 1.5. And you'll be able to change one number and the model will update and it'll spit out, a projection based on those assumptions changing. So that is coming, and this will really help to empower investors and stakeholders so that they can, really see what the impact is with the assumptions that they're comfortable, right? Everyone's going to have a different opinion, and so this will allow you to, see what those different opinions look like, and we'll have a little sensitivity table in there so that you'll see, the big picture of, okay, how does 2.5 versus 2.7 versus 3 visas per family, how does that impact the waiting time? And you'll see that in a dynamic chart, in what we call a sensitivity table. And that will be very helpful, we think, for investors and brokers and attorneys as well to kind of see, what the range of potential outcomes and how sensitive the backlog projections are to changing those underlying assumptions. The second thing that we're doing is we're putting together a detailed analysis of the last major, quote, invisible visa backlog that hit China in May 2015, right? So long story short, we've seen this movie before. This exact same situation happened in 2015 with China. In, I believe it was April of 2015, everything was current in China, visa bulletin. Then May 2015, 1 month later, there was a 2-year backlog announced on the visa bulletin. No warning. We didn't have any FOIA request back in 2015 that gave us access to this alarmingly high number of applications that were piling in 2014 and early 2015. Didn't have that data, so there was no early warning at all. And just in 1 month, there was a 2-year backlog, and investors who got caught in that backlog, as Mike mentioned earlier, were in December of 2015. This visa backlog showed up in May of 2015. And so in 9 years, we've got a 7-month advancement, right? So like that should be a huge warning sign of just, okay, once it shows up in the visa bulletin, it's too late, right? The bell's been rung and you've missed the train completely, right? So now that we can see this same situation happening again, and we have all the data from 2015, 2016, 2017, all through the present, we can do a little case study analysis and see, okay, what was happening in 2014, 2015 before this visa backlog happened, and what was the impact for those investors who were filing before the backlog, and what actually happened to them. And then we can kind of overlay the current situation of, we see these visa categories being exhausted, and okay, looking at what happened in China 10 years ago, what does that look like for new Indian and Chinese investors filing today in a category that hasn't officially hit a backlog in the visa bulletin yet, but is going to in the very short term. So we think that'll also be very helpful for helping investors kind of see what happened last time, and how it's going to play out this time. And then the third item is we're going to build an archive of current visa backlog predictions among stakeholders for future reference. So obviously, other regional centers, attorneys, brokers, everyone's going to share their own opinion on what this urban TEA backlog looks like. Our predictions are, public. We've made them available on the website. You'll be able to download them, watch recordings. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion and analysis of the data. That's critical, obviously. What we're going to do is assemble articles, webinars, posts that kind of collectively document other opinions in the space about what this backlog looks like. That way, in the future, in 1, 2, 3 years in the future, as we go out and we see how this has actually played out, we'll be able to look back in time and compare, okay, how were other people projecting this, and how does it compare against our own predictions, right? So in the future, you'll be able to see, all right, well, who was right, who was wrong. In general, we're tired and frustrated of seeing other stakeholders in the space, other regional centers, brokers, et cetera, just blatantly mislead investors with predictions that are just so not even close to reality. And that's just very frustrating when the data is available, and with some very basic math, you can arrive at a conclusion that will actually help you make an informed decision, right? So everyone has their own opinion, great, but be ready to stand behind yours, and just use common sense. Mike, any other thoughts?
No, I think that's exactly right. What we're trying to do is bring transparency and accountability, and we're excited that we have the data, shocked at what the data revealed. We're still digesting it. It's only been a week since this data was available, not even. So we're still digesting it just like everybody else. I think that we probably came to the conclusions and did the analysis a little bit faster because that's in our backgrounds, but we're confident many others will come to this same conclusion, and likely much more drastic of a backlog than we are. We don't want to cause any fear, but we are interested to get other opinions. And as part of this, we don't have it on the slide, we plan to speak with many of the leading immigration attorneys, get their thoughts. And one of the other things that we need help with is we want to collect those numbers of the amount of applications or applicants per application, visas per application, from all of the leading attorneys. So we can get a sense of that multiplier 2.5. Are we online? Are we not? So we're going to work with many of our partners. Hopefully we can get a representative sample of that, because any data that we can get, which helps dial in this model for reality, we think is very useful to our investors.
Exactly. So if we look at actual I-526E petitions over the last 3 months, and we can see exactly what the average number of people per petition is, that's going to be the best data to inform what that multiplier should be. All right. We won't spend a lot of time on these slides. Advantages of rural projects, we've hit a lot of those points significantly over the last 30, 40 minutes or so. So I'll just kind of pace through these just to give you a sense of what other people in the industry are thinking, and why rural is really the best way to go if you're looking to get to the US in the quickest way possible. And obviously we have 3 currently available rural projects: our Twin Lakes project, Wahali, and Keystone, which we'll spend a little more time discussing shortly. All right, so projects. Mike, do you want to start talking about our rural projects first?
Yeah, and as you look at the slide, one of the things that we think is most important is that after the passage of the RIA, It is no longer a one-size-fits-all market. Historically, pre-RIA, most EB5 deals looked and felt pretty similar to each other because there weren't these other categories or other ways of just benefits. But now that the RIA has passed, there are many different things to consider when looking at EB5 projects. So the first big distinction is the rural versus the urban TEA. So the rural deals are the three that we have at the top, and the urban deals are the two at the bottom. So for the rural deals up top, first is our Twin Lakes, Georgia project. This has been one of our most popular EB5 projects over the past 9 months. And the reason for that is because it's a 1,300 home neighborhood with over 600 homes already sold. Over 400 homes have been built. So when you look at a neighborhood like this that's so far progressed, the jobs have been created already for the EB5 investors. It counts as a rural area and it's being built by a very large developer with $20 billion of experience. So it checks all those boxes for the rural deal. The next deal, our Kindred Keystone project. This one we've been working on for several months now. It's an under construction project at the Keystone Ski Mountain, the closest major ski resort to Denver. They've already pre-sold over 70% of the condos. They've topped off 2 of the towers. Enough jobs have also been created for all the EB5 investors. And we will have a senior recorded mortgage on the property once operations commence and the condominiums close. So it's a very simple, straightforward deal that's easy to understand in a rural area with proven demand. Our last rural deal, the Wahali project. This is a large new neighborhood near Park City, Utah, also under development with a golf course opening this summer and the first amenities delivered. This one is already 956F approved, and we have 526Es approved in this project as well. It's very close to full, so we're not really advertising this, but if anybody's interested, please feel free to reach out on it. And each of these deals has a little bit of differences of how they're structured, but generally the rural deals all feel similar. When our urban TEA deals, rather than hitting on the get your green card as fast as possible in a deal where all the jobs are created, we've structured an urban deal, the Boynton Beach project, a little bit differently to meet other investor priorities like short-term repayment and higher returns. And with that, I'll hand it over to Sam to run through the Boynton Beach project.
Thanks, Mike. So on the urban side, we've done almost 20 EB5 projects with Coulter over the last 10 years. The Twin Lakes project is being developed by the Coulter Group, and so is this Boynton Beach multifamily project. The Boynton Beach multifamily project is a 210-unit active adult multifamily apartment community in South Florida. The business plan is build the building, rent it out, and then sell the entire building to a large either real estate investment trust likely or a large insurance company that would hold it in their portfolio. So in this project, we've got 2 different options for investors. We've got an equity option with a 5% annual return, and then a debt option with a shorter loan term of 3+1 or 4 years total. The key here is that even though this project is earlier on, Coulter already owns the land, they're fully permitted, they're starting construction on the next couple of months. Coulter as a company has done almost 200 real estate projects over the last 25 plus years. They've never failed to complete a project ever, and they've never failed to repay a single loan ever. So earlier on, this project doesn't have a ton of jobs already, but it does have a much shorter investment term of about 4 years for both the debt and the equity. And on the equity side, this follows a very similar project, our Saltaire project, which was successfully completed a few months ago, where we had investors, we paid out almost $2 million in preferred returns to investors who had invested there, and an essentially identical structure as the Boynton Beach multifamily project. So we've done another equity deal exactly like this with Coulter that was fantastically successful and just wrapped up a few months ago. And now we're doing the exact same thing again, offering both a debt and equity option on the same project, but earlier on, which allows us to have these more appealing financial terms. Ahmed, any general comments on kind of how investors should first look at rural versus urban, and then once they've decided within urban and rural, kind of what what's most important for them.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we do really well is provide investors with options to look at, right? Every investor is not going to be the same as everybody else. Every investor has their own specific situation and specific priorities, and each of these projects speaks to a different one, right? So I think really what investors should do, and I kind of start with a maybe a little bit backwards than what people might think. People often think that they'll see a project and, oh, I've got to do EB5. No, you should really be doing it the reverse, right? You should first make the decision with your family that you want to become an EB5 investor, that you want to obtain a green card through investment. Once you've made that jump and made that decision, okay, now I have to go out and find the best project for me, right? So now it's the time, once you've made that decision to move forward, to go out there, really look at your priorities. And if your priority is, getting a better deal or getting a higher return, okay, great. We've got projects that speak to that, but you're going to put your immigration goals on the back seat a little bit as a result, right? The urban projects, there's just more diversity. We can put together much better terms typically, versus rural. We're looking for more safety of capital. We're looking to make sure that there's preservation of principal and that you can get your money back. So yeah, I think a lot of investors often see a project ad come up on their, whether it's their YouTube, their Instagram, whatever, and they immediately kind of run towards it. And that's what becomes their defining kind of goals for EB5. It should be the other way around. You should be making a decision to do EB5 in general. You should then prioritize, okay, is my green card the most important thing? Could I make more money just by getting a green card, right? Those kinds of considerations. Okay, which project will get me my green card the fastest? Great. We've got 3 great options that are going to put you right within that 2-year timeline to obtain a green card in your hand. Otherwise, if your priority is, okay, let me get a good balance of securing my family's future, maybe that is 5 to 6, maybe even 7 years down the road. No worries. I'm in the US. I'll have an EAD throughout that entire time. And I want to kind of prioritize a slightly higher return or slightly earlier return of capital. Great. We've got projects that fit into that mold as well. So yeah, just having those conversations with family members and determining what your priorities are will go a long ways in making the right choice for yourself as an investor.
Perfect. Thanks, Ahmed. So over the last couple of weeks, we've published 2 other really high value articles. One is about 4 key factors to avoid losing money in an EB5 investment, where we talk about 4 items to look at: borrower quality, financing costs, independence, and project profitability. These are all really helpful points for investors. Once, as Ahmed mentioned, once you've decided to do EB5, you've got to hire an immigration attorney to document where your funds are coming from. We'll be able to introduce you to a few independent attorneys. And if for any reason you don't like any of the few attorneys we connect you with, no problem. You can go to Google, type in EB5 attorney, interview whoever you want, hire any attorney you like, no restriction, complete freedom. And once you've done that and you have your source of funds documents, your bank statements, your tax returns, and you're ready to actually pick a project, that's where you'd want to look at posts like this, and really understand, okay, now I'm ready to invest. What project do I want to pick? And you want to look at borrower quality, financing cost, independence, profitability. And then just generally from the EB5 company itself, we've published a new post called our Bill of Rights, which basically lays out 10 rights every EB5 investor should have. And this is kind of a company level set of rights. So no matter what project you're looking at from EB5AN, we'll be able to, give you access and provide, all of the data information related to each of these 10 points. And we think that these are kind of the baseline 10 items that, whether you're looking at a project with EB5AN or with any other regional center, we think these are kind of table stakes, right? So no matter what EB5 project, no matter what company, you should make sure that you're getting these 10 items. And if you're not getting them, then that's probably a bad sign that the company that you're talking to isn't willing to share information that may expose some weaknesses or red flags and whatnot. And so, you just want to make sure that you're asking for this information and that you're getting it. So anyway, these are two recent posts that we think are really helpful for investors who are considering investing in new projects, post February, to familiarize yourselves with and just demand that you get them from whatever project you consider. Last item is our Twin Lakes project. We held a site visit back in September of 2023. We had a huge turnout in person, and we're doing another event on Saturday, March 16th. So, a full 2 weeks before the April 1st deadline. We've got a lot of people signed up already. And so if you are, in the source of funds process now, you're working with an attorney or you're about to hire an attorney, and you still haven't, wired money to a project and you're still kind of in that diligence phase, we'd welcome you to come join us in person. Myself, Sam, and Mike will be there in person, along with several other members of our team and several other top immigration attorneys as well. And we'll be able to, give you a private tour of the project, see the model home park, meet with some of the Coulter on-site executive team there, see homes under construction, talk to some residents, really get an understanding of why this project is successful, how everything looks on the ground, and also get a chance to interact with the EB5AN team and many other investors. I'm sure we'll have investors who've already joined the project and many who are about to join the project this month. So if you are interested in coming, we only have a few slots left. It'll be Saturday, March 16th, so 2 weeks from 2 days ago, that afternoon, 12 to 4 p.m. So if you are interested in coming, it's an easy drive from Atlanta, about 1 hour. And reach out, send us an email, and we can get you the link. And we'd love to see you in person there, before you make a final investment decision with this upcoming April 1st fee increase. And with that concludes our formal remarks for today's webinar. If you are interested in chatting with our team about any of the conclusions, data that we discussed today, please use this QR code and you'll be able to schedule a call with our team. And obviously we can chat with you as well and answer any questions, get you information, financial statements, details, documents about any of the 5 EB5 projects that we have available. We're going to be working nights and weekends over the next 30 days because we've got many clients who are, motivated to invest, many of whom are doing partial investments. So funding a portion of the $800,000 plus attorney and government fees before April 1, and then with a commitment to fund the balance, over a set period of time. So that is an option as well, which allows you to lock in an earlier priority date and also the lower government fee and save about $8,000. Ahmed, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think you've covered it all. But I think this has just been a super informative session for all those investors who are either in the middle of their EB5 journey or just starting out. We hope that you were able to learn something from this seminar. And there's a lot of information that we've shared, and some of it can go even deeper. So don't hesitate to reach out to us directly so we can explain more complicated items to you and walk you through what might be best for you as an investor. So please reach out to us. We're happy to help.
Yep, and in the chat box on everyone's screen, I've just sent a link to our call booking button. So if you are interested in getting some time on the calendar to chat with me, Mike, or Ahmed, the best way to arrange that is to just use this link and select a 30-minute time slot, and one of us will be able to jump on a call with you and talk about EB5, the backlog, any of the projects, help you get connected to a few recommended EB5 attorneys that still have bandwidth or capacity to take on new cases before the deadline. So let us know however we can help. And we look forward to hearing from you. And Mike, anything else before we end?
No, it was a longer webinar than usual, but ton of good information. I would just say, yeah, that the data just came out. It's critical data. We love to see analysis from others as well, and we'll continue to post more on this topic. So thanks again.
Great. Thank you, everybody.